Hi, I'm Amanda Jane, and welcome to the Communicate with Confidence podcast. My aim is to take the fear out of communicating and make it easy and fun. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking about everything to do with good communication, how we can connect with our audience, get better at speaking and giving presentations, increase visibility, and ultimately get more sales. I'll also be talking to some incredible people about their business, and I'll be getting their insights on how they view communication and how comfortable they are showing up in person and on social media. So let's get started. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Communicate with Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Jane, and today I have with me Sarah Langslow, who is the author of Do Sweat the Small Stuff, Harness the Power of Micro Interactions to Transform Your Leadership. I got that out all in one. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here, and I'm dying to know all about your book. But before we get there, I've got to ask you a few questions. So, do you have a favorite motivational song?
Yeah, and I had to think hard about, I was thinking hard about this one because I did have a little heads up before the podcast that this was coming my way, as I've heard you on, on your previous podcast. So the one I settled on it's a bit of a cheesy one. I'm not gonna lie. It's Eye of the Tiger,
I love
Survivor.
that.
And it's
Yay.
your listeners probably know it's the theme from Rocky 3, I think it
Yeah.
is. But it's one of those songs. I don't know if you have this, that some songs just have really strong associations for you, really strong positive associations. And it was many, many moons ago. I used to be quite a competitive rower, and it was actually at university. There were rowing competitions, and they used to play this song at full blast. And it was always, as soon as I hear the opening, it's like I'm right back there and the adrenaline's going. I'm like, I'm ready, let's go. So
It
it
does.
always kind of gets me going.
Yeah, I can imagine. It does seem to kind of prepare you for battle almost, doesn't it? As soon
That's
as you
quite a
hear
good
that, you're done.
description.
Yeah, instantly. And it's funny you mentioned that. My daughter, my 17-year-old daughter, was showing me a TikTok of a 3-year-old girl singing that song, Eye of the Tiger. And I thought, you go, girl. This tiny little 3-year-old singing it. And it's just one of those songs that's going to transcend generations. So I absolutely love that. That is going on the Spotify playlist. And what about a motivational quote?
So I don't have a single one that I sort of always come back to. I think I'm a bit like whatever is on my mind or the sort of theme of stuff I'm personally working on reflects the sort of quote. So the one I'm thinking a lot about at the moment is do or do not, there is no try.
Oh, and I
So
think
that
I know
do
where
you
that
know where this
comes
one's
from.
from?
But you know what? It's from The Big Bang Theory, not the film.
No, actually, no. I think the film came first because it's
Yeah.
from Yoda in Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. But and I just love it. Partly, I'm as a now as a writer, I still struggle to call myself that. I still don't really feel like a writer, but as a writer, I'm something of a nerd for sort of syntax and the way we say things. But I love the way it disrupts. It sort of just it always makes me like, no, just do it or don't do it.
Yeah,
Choose.
yeah,
Don't sit there and try and be like, well, maybe I'll sort of do a half-hearted effort.
yeah.
You can do something or not do something, but if you're going to do it, go for it. Give it your full
Give it all.
effort. Go
Yeah,
all in. Give something a really good go.
yeah.
So whenever it's what I like. Yeah,
Yeah, and
personally, a
I
good
know
frame
it
of
because
mind.
if anyone watches The Big Bang Theory, Penny says it to Leonard, and I haven't, and that's how I know that line. Although I haven't seen all of it, Star Wars, it is Star Wars, isn't it? And that's how I know that quote. But do you know what? I've actually learned loads of stuff like that from Big Bang. But yeah, I absolutely love that quote. And my next question, I'm going to ask you, do you read? But I see behind you loads of books, so and you're a writer, so you clearly do. So what? Have you got a favorite book or anything in particular that stands out to you apart from your own?
Yeah, that would be a bit I don't know, that would be a bit narcissistic. Like, yes, my
I
favorite
think
book is
that's
my
really cool.
book.
Of course, it's wonderful. We don't bang our own drum enough, I think.
I do love my book, don't get me wrong, but again, I'm similar. I sort of go through phases, and I was thinking, what one am I recommending a lot at the moment? And it's one I read quite recently, which is Right Kind of Wrong by Amy Edmondson. And she's a Harvard Business Review editor. I think she works. Well, she's also a professor. It's like she's an academic in this area, but she does a lot of work, in particular around psychological safety and this idea of how we can learn in this book to fail well. And I think for a lot of people, it's and I'm sure you talk about this a lot on on your podcast. It's this fear of failure that stops us doing things. It stops us speaking up. It stops us being seen. And she does, for me, what's really interesting in the book is she breaks it down that yes, there are sort of better failures and less useful failures. You know, what she calls very basic failures are the ones which are easily avoidable and really we need to just put the effort and not do. But intelligent failures, failures where we learn stuff, failures where we're getting into new territory or trying things we've never done before, and okay, it doesn't work out. Never mind, we still learn from it. And when I was reading it, it really helped me do a lot of reframing. You probably get the theme with the sort of do or do not, but there
Mm-hmm.
is no try. There's a sort of general theme to just get out there and do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it will work and some of it won't, but at least you're taking action and moving forwards rather than sitting somewhere comfortable and going, oh, I'm not really sure if I want to do that. Because then you're neither moving forward nor learning anything.
Mm-hmm. And I wish I'd known how essential it was to fail when I was learning. And I remember when I was younger doing things, failing and thinking that was it. That meant I was no good at that thing. And I didn't keep trying. I abandoned it. And I'm really glad that the narrative has changed around that word and that young people are accepting that. Oh yeah, well I failed, I'll do it again. I'll fail, I'll do it again. And I just absolutely love that theme. And it is just so essential. But I wish that's something I would tell my younger self.
And I think it's what was the particular nuance for this is I think I've intellectually understood how important it is to fail for a long time. It's like, well, that's how you learn. It's part of experimenting, da 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 da. But she really addresses the emotional side of learning how to fail, of how we handle that, how we build resilience to bounce back, how we stop failure adding all of this meaning or judgment on ourselves. And it just becomes a thing that happened that we can learn from, and it's fine. And so, because I think that's the side that is often under addressed. We can be very flippant about, well, it's how you learn. It's like, well, that's great, but it still feels rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
When you
Yeah.
try something and you fail at it or it doesn't work out, you sort of have to address the emotional side of it as well, I think.
And what was the term you used? Psychological safety, was that it? I think and I've not come across that term too much. I did when I was studying coaching, and I just love the fact that it's being addressed and it's being talked about, and I think it's so important. But it's fascinating, and obviously I'm in my geek zone now. I could listen to you all night.
It's really connected to the stuff I write about in the book because it's, you know, so if your listeners aren't familiar, so psychological, I'll probably get the definition not quite right, but it's essentially it's about how you create a culture and an environment where it's okay to make mistakes, where mistakes aren't penalized, they aren't judged, they're accepted as a normal part of it. And it doesn't have to mean that environment's soft or always kind or that we don't address underperformance. That can be a sort of a misunderstanding in the term. Like we're still striving for really high performance and to learn and to be great, but it means we accept that mistakes and failure are a part of that, and we don't have a culture where they're either penalized or judged or where it's just not safe to make them. That's where the sort of
Yeah,
safety
yeah,
part comes in.
safety. Yeah. No, it is. It's fascinating, and I'm definitely going to look up that book. That is amazing. Thank you. So, tell us about your book.
My book, so Do Sweat the Small Stuff, it came out in the summer this July. And I mean, that's been a labor of love for the last nearly 2 years, probably more than 2 years, actually. Um, it's all about the tiny interactions that we have with other humans every day. So it's based on this premise that life actually isn't always about those big, significant, important moments. So think of it almost if you think of an analogy of a marriage or a long-term relationship, it's not about the wedding day. Don't get me wrong, the wedding day is great and really important and lovely and loads of fun. But a marriage is about the day to day, the tiny little things. Does someone take the bin out? Do they remember to say, how was your day when they come in? What's the expression on their face? Do they, it's all those tiny little moments. And it's the same day to day when we're interacting with people, and particularly when we're leading people. Those tiny, what I call micro interactions, actually really add up to the relationship. It's what we say, it's what we don't say, maybe what we avoid saying. It's how we say it. Do we ask questions or do we make statements? What's our tone? What's our energy? How do we phrase things even? It's also about more than just what we say. It's about what we listen to, what we ignore, again, the conversations we avoid, and about our actions and interactions and habits and behaviors. Do we walk in with a smile on our face? Are we good at managing our own emotions? Do we say it's really important for people to switch off at the end of the day, but send them 14 emails chasing them about something between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. the following morning, right? All those little habits, and ways we do things. Even conscious right now as I'm talking to you, even are we leaning forward and sort of really up in people's faces? Are we leaning back, maybe speaking more slowly, leaving more space? And right, all of those things affect how we communicate, how we come across, and the impact we have on others.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically, the book is all about those, helping us understand the impact we have through our own natural patterns of interacting,
Mm-hmm.
and then a little bit about how we can maybe reshape those if the impact we want, the impact we intend, isn't quite matching up to the way we might be currently coming across.
It's so interesting, and you're just completely speaking to me in my geek zone. And I always say that, just as an example, as a human, not necessarily leader, but as a human, you have the power to set the tone of the room the minute you walk in. So if you walk in and you're happy and cheery, everyone will feed off that vibe. But if the car's broke down, you walk in, you're in a bad mood, and you enter with that, everyone will come off that. But you're absolutely right about the micro signals that you give, how observing people's personal space. For example, some people don't actually like being touched, for example. And me, I'm not that touchy-feely, but to convey compassion, might touch your arm to convey compassion. I've had to learn that that's not okay, even though I'm not that touchy-feely. So all of those little things, that behaviors that I've learned over the years, because I won't go in and give you a big hug, because that's not me at all. But it's so, and it's becoming more self-aware of how we show up with other people, and especially when we are in when we are leading, everything that you're possibly not aware of is impacting everyone that you are leading. And I'm definitely going to read your book.
It's such a great example, right? Because you're in that moment when you reach out, or your instinct is to reach out and just put your hand on somebody's arm. Your intent is so positive. It's, I want to reassure, I want to let them know I'm here, I want to let them, give them a bit of comfort or reassurance through some physical touch. Because if someone put their hand on your arm, that's how you would interpret it. That's your understanding. It's sort of the way you see the world. And you're spot on, because it's not about our intent. Because if the impact of that is to leave the other person feeling uncomfortable because they interpret physical touch as an invasion of their space, or something that makes them feel uncomfortable and means they're actually not listening to a word you say, they're just thinking, why does she have her hand on my arm?
Yeah.
Right. And that mismatch between our intent and our is a huge theme through the book, because it's like, I generally have a positive view on the world. I think most of us have very good intentions.
Mhm.
And actually, we kind of want to know where those intentions aren't translating into the impact that we're hoping we have and that we want to have.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it is. And as going through that journey as I myself, a professional communicator, as I like to say, when I meet new people, when I work with new people, I try to casually have that dialogue. Now, this is going to come out wrong, but I try to establish, how do you like to be communicated with? For example, do you like short emails? Would you prefer I popped in? And and I wouldn't necessarily go, are you happy with me touching you on the arm when I want to convey, that kind of thing. But it is worth spending some time getting to know that person and understanding how they want to be communicated with, because you can't imagine how, your intent, as you say, may be in the very best interest, but you've got absolutely no idea how that is being perceived. So it's worth trying to invest some time. And you won't get all the answers, you won't get the 100% of how they want to be communicated with, but invest in that time trying to learn how that person perceives the world. And sometimes it is okay just to ask some direct questions about, their basic sort of communication um wants,
Preferences.
yeah,
Yeah.
preferences, that's the word. But it's fascinating because everyone is different. And sometimes we've all had good leaders and we've all had bad leaders. And that's how we learn to develop our own style. But it's interesting in that you cannot lead in one specific way to a group of people. You have to be dynamic and you have to be fluid and you have to flex. And with the one result in mind, to get the job done in the best possible way with the happiest possible outcome. But the dynamics of human behavior and leadership behavior will always be fascinated.
And
Always.
you're right. And I think the way we get the job done in the best possible way is through getting the best out of our people. And so actually, if we start with our people, I'm going to violently agree with you throughout a lot of this thing, that I think it's a big gap for many, whether we use the term leaders or simply anyone who is managing other people. I think there's a big gap that we don't nearly often enough have the conversations about how we like to work. We talk about the tasks, we talk about the deadlines, we talk about the outcomes we need to get, but we don't sit down and have a conversation, as you say. How do you like to work? Under what conditions do you thrive?
Mhm.
Do you do you like me to offer support? Do you want to wait to ask? As you say, do you prefer a quick phone call, or would you always prefer a message or something before we speak in person?
Mhm.
And as you say, you may not get all the answers, but the other thing that those conversations do that's very valuable is it sort of establishes that it's okay to have a conversation about that. And if something in the communication isn't working, you can talk about it.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't realize you didn't like to be emailed like that. No problem at all. We can adjust that. It
Mhm.
sort of sets it up as a normal conversation topic, if you like, which
Yeah.
is
And
which is just so helpful.
And, and people are genuinely a bit confused when you have that conversation. And they're like, what? You're asking me that? Oh, well, actually, I like
I
this.
get to have a say. Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
And I think it conveys the fact that you're compassionate and that you're giving that person the opportunity to say. And I had a really, really funny example last week. Someone that I work with sent me a message, and I've told them, brevity is your friend. Just tell me what you need to tell me, and that's fine. And they apologized for being brusque. And I was like, what? No, it's fine. You don't have to begin with, dear sir, madam, thank you for your consideration. But I just thought, wow, how interesting that our manners were had this influence on this message. And they know that if it's just, can you do this, please? That's fine. That's how I like to be communicated with, because I'm so busy, got so many demands on my time. That's perfect for me. But I think out of common courtesy, people genuinely are not used to being asked that question, which is just so interesting. But I think very empowering to ask someone, how do you like to be communicated with?
Very much so. Yeah.
Hmm. So what about your leadership journey then? How's that been? Have you got any tales from how you've
We've
been?
only got this is only a half-hour podcast. Nobody needs my life story. Well, so my background in some ways, it's a sort of weird mix of the traditional and the completely non-traditional. I came from university, went into a sort of milk round job as they were known then. I went into consulting. A few years later, I did an MBA. I used that to move over and work in banking for a few years. Rapidly realized that that was not where I wanted to work and moved back into consulting. So it was sort of a relatively normal career path up to that point. I guess in terms of, I don't know, moments that defined my career, if that isn't too highbrow a way of putting
Yeah,
it.
well,
I
key
think
milestones. Yeah,
key
absolutely.
milestones. There we go. That sounds a bit less. Yeah. One of those, I think, when I was in banking, there was a period towards the end, especially where I just wasn't happy. I knew it wasn't right for me. I felt a bit stuck in the job. I felt a bit trapped, feeling like I'd made a wrong move in my career and I didn't know how to sort of undo it and get out of it again. And one of my very close friends at the time, we were away for a weekend together, and I'd sort of poured out all my woes. And she said to me, "Have you ever thought of working with a coach?" And it was just that, on so many levels, her bothering to ask the question, her thinking of that for me, thinking, I wonder if that might help. I'd never worked with a coach. I didn't really even know what coaching was particularly at that point. And that very much set me off on track for sort of the second half of my career so far, if you like, because firstly, it got me back into consulting. But the process of me doing that really opened my eyes in terms of what was possible through partnering with a coach and having that space where I could get support and get reflection and be challenged and just see the world a bit differently. And fast forward a few years, that coach, while I'd been working with her, had said to me, "I think you'd make a good coach." And I'd sort of go, "Oh, well, that's very nice, lovely," and gone off into my consulting job and said, "Well, that's right." But then sort of fast forward a few years later when I thought, it's like that seed that gets planted that sort of grows away at the back, and you go, maybe I want to come back to that. And yeah, I went back to her and said, A, did you mean it? And B, can you really make a living doing this? Because I want to make a proper living doing it. And she said yes on both counts. And I took the plunge, I retrained. And that was, what's that? Maybe that was about 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago. I embarked on that sort of second part of my career, if you like, to move into coaching. And I've been doing that full time ever since. So working as a coach, working everything around leadership development, really. One to one, doing some work with teams, I speak, and then the latest iteration of that being putting some of those ideas and things I've learned through that 8 years of coaching hundreds of clients down into a book so I can hopefully get it out to a wider audience.
Wow, it's so incredible, and your story resonates with me because I was something similar. I was offered coaching at work, at leadership coaching, a few sessions, and had a few problems. And when I went through it, because it was such a revelation, working with this coach, I remember sitting thinking, "What witchcraft is this?" Well, what is it? Was so transformative. And I immediately knew in my bones that's what I wanted to do. And I did the same. I studied and I got qualified, and then I used it in my job, and it really, really helped me be a better leader and helped me with that understanding and self-awareness. But it was like peeping through a curtain and seeing the other half of the world, because it just made me understand so much that I hadn't been able to articulate beforehand. And it really, really did just put it just helped me articulate so many things in my mind. But like you, it was so transformative, and it was just like wow. And yeah, similar situation. I spent that, the time since that, doing that and integrate that in my job. Haven't wrote a book yet, who knows? But I love the fact that
Still
it's
time.
I love the fact that it's moved you to do that. And you see the world through different eyes, don't you, when you're a coach? Because it's obviously the opposite of directive, and you're steering a different kind of vehicle, aren't you? And from a leadership perspective, it just can make so much of a difference in the workplace.
Yeah, very much so. And I think even you certainly do see the world differently once you are a coach. But I think even just working with a coach, that's, when you talk about the transformative power, that's kind of what it comes back down to, is that they help you see yourself and the world a bit differently.
Mm.
There's that the other quite well-known quote, which is that we see the world not as it is, but as we are.
Hmm.
In that, we go through the world with this kind of lens on, built from all our past experiences and our family and upbringing, culture. Your example of touching somebody on the arm, it's a cultural or something you've learned, that's what your family did, or that's what your friends did, or your culture did. But the risk is that we see the world as, well, everybody's like that.
Hmm.
And whether that's for our relationships in our personal life or our professional life or how we lead others, it's exactly having that realization that the world isn't fixed, that others are different, and that we can shift our own perspective to see things in a different way.
Hmm.
Just opens up so much, I don't know, freedom almost.
Yeah.
It, so much possibility
Yeah.
through not having this sort of more fixed view of the world.
And I've always loved that when you see something in a different way, or when you have a conversation, you see things in a different light. I just love, I love when you sit and you go, wow, I hadn't considered that. That is just my favorite thing to say. So I think we've touched on a little bit, but how important do you think communication is in leadership?
It's so fundamental because for me, leadership really is about relationship. It's about inspiring others. It's about moving and motivating others to want to do things. Leadership isn't about requiring or having control over others or sort of forcing others to do things. We do that through the relationships we build and the trust we build, and that comes down to communication. It's about how we interact with others, how we show up, how we influence. So communicate is just so fundamental, and it's in some ways a I was going to say a skill we take for granted. I don't quite mean it that way, but I think many many of us, it's like when you start peeling the layers away and learning more about it, you almost realize how much you don't know, or how much skill you can build, how much nuance, how much thought you can really put into it. And that, I use the analogy in the book about talking that so many of us, we kind of go through the world on autopilot. And we do it partly from necessity because we don't really have enough brain capacity to think about every single tiny moment all of the time. Just being able to digest our food and breathe alongside holding a conversation and resisting the force of gravity, right? There's already a lot going on. But you add extra layers into that and being able to notice the nuances of how somebody responds to you, to be able to adapt, to be able to think through the situation and the outcome you want and have that influence the way you communicate, but just the way we show up, as you say, our whole sort of being, demeanor, energy, tone, all of those things, which are all communicating.
Mhm.
Whether we're thinking about them intentionally or not, we are communicating.
Mhm.
And so that awareness and understanding of that is, to me, a big difference between effective and much less effective leadership if we're not thinking about that enough.
And that's why I find it so fascinating to spend some time, in a business, for example, investing in you, working out, learning about yourself. What can you improve? What are the best points about you? And when you learn some of the basics and put some of those principles into practice, the things that you can achieve with diplomacy, tact, authenticity, respect, it's incredible. And sometimes I'll do little experiments and I'll think, I'll try this way. Let's see how that goes. And I just love it because, 20 years ago, I maybe wouldn't have been so, so, I don't want to say skilled, but maybe it must be. And you learn things as you go along, but there are so many, there are good ways to do things and not such good ways. But I do like being able to bring in that diplomacy and doing things, and that usually means spending a little bit longer going, doing implementing something, but it's worth the investment at the time, if you see what I mean. But spending that time and learning those few, some basic skills really is worth that investment. So how comfortable are you showing up for your audience online then? So you got this book, and you've probably been doing this book tour, which I imagine is really glamorous. It's probably not. So how's
Complete
that been?
opposites of glamorous. I mean, I think like many authors, it's we have to do self-promotion. It's a very tiny percentage of books out there that get any form of sort of big marketing machine behind them. So like the majority of authors, I'm, out there sort of promoting it myself. It's always an interesting question with how comfortable. I mean, a lot more comfortable than I used to be, I think, certainly. That's not to say I always find it easy. There's definitely the days I just want to hide and not, or it takes me an hour and a half to write a LinkedIn post because I'm overthinking it so chronically,
Have
whatever
you
it might
had
be.
to have you had to step out of your comfort zone and make yourself do it? Because this stuff doesn't come naturally to most people.
100%. No,
Yeah.
it's one of the ways I look at it is that it's ultimately it's all practice. I'm not trying to sort of put on a final polished performance because in part because I'm not there yet, and I don't even know really where there is. I'm not sure there is a sort of final destination with this. In part because I think, sometimes we get too polished and it creates a disconnect. It creates a sort of barrier between us and our audience because they're like, are you real? You seem a bit too polished and a bit too perfect. And yet it does take that confidence to be out there with a bit of messiness or a bit of getting things wrong, or, the odd thing that just sort of completely misses the mark, or you screw up. So I look at it as sort of a constant practice, and some weeks I'm up for pushing myself and, getting out there and doing more. I certainly did a lot in the lead up to the book of putting myself out there. I then sort of retreated a bit afterwards because I found that as an introvert, I found that tiring, to do that sort of relentlessly for 2 or 3 months beforehand. But it's all part of growing the skill and the muscle for me, and I keep trying to do it. I think the area I'm working on at the moment is probably to be a bit alongside the consistency of doing it and just practice and doing more, is to be a bit more Marmite with it, to be slightly more provocative, have slightly more opinions. I like, because deep down I would rather be sharing things, or not it's and I don't it's not sort of provocative for the sake of it, but what I want to do is to be attracting the kind of people who gel with me and resonate with me and can imagine working with me, and repelling the kind of people who are like, you're not my type of. And that's good. Like if my the way I show up and the way I communicate and that my visibility does that, and it sort of is a bit polarizing, that's actually a good thing. Because if I'm trying to appeal to everybody,
Yeah.
I'm probably going to end up appealing to nobody. And I'm not saying that's easy. I think I really have to push myself, and I still, even when I push myself, probably end up a bit more vanilla than I would like to be. But it's a constant practice, and something I'm working on.
I just think it's so hard because by the very fact that you've written this book, you need to cut yourself off from the world and you need solitude, and you've got to spend time researching and doing it, and then you're coming this cocoon, you're coming out as this butterfly, and you're like, right, well, I've done all this and I loved it. It was a labor of love, and I have to do what now? I have to go on podcasts. I have to go on the radio. You have to do the opposite to what you spent time doing, and getting all your visibility layers, and you're right. You do need to be a little bit controversial because you're gonna have to get people to disagree with you to get the debate going, and sometimes the internet's not a nice place. But in order to do that, you've got to sort of prompt that debate, and it's just that paradox. And it's got to be exhausting, but you've just got to pace yourself. But it's just that publicity trail. Unfortunately, it's the necessary evil of and I think it's the same for everybody. You might have a cake shop, or and you might like baking the cake and selling your cakes, but you still got to go out there and tell people about your cake shop. And it's you've just got to be so good at so many things to do the thing that you just want to do. It's
Although it's funny because I think the more I do it, almost the more I enjoy it. And part of it is also that framing, because if I relate to it as a necessary evil, I'm probably going to suffer my way through it and hate it and feel like it's a chore and feel like I'm failing at it and that that's a bad thing, and that, so on and so forth. And it's just going to be miserable. And if I can shift that and sort of relate to it as something that I play with, something that I'm, having fun with.
Hmm.
I think for a long time I held LinkedIn in particular as this sort of, well, I have to show up very professionly because I have to have
Yeah.
this persona, because no one will ever hire me for any sensible amount of money if I show up and I'm a bit irreverent. But humor is such a big part of who I am and the way I work with people. I did some work, and I was working with someone who sort of did a survey of some of my clients, and they said the single biggest thing they said about working with you is that they laugh in their coaching sessions. Like, I don't know how I feel about that, because I feel like I should be serious and it's like, no, because when I'm coaching people, if they're getting very heavy and self-judgmental, and they're noticing all the things they're doing wrong or that aren't working or that opportunities, God, that's a miserable place to sit. Whereas if I can get them to laugh at themselves a bit and go, okay, that was an interesting choice of things to do given the circumstances. Like, I wonder where there's a lightness to it, and it makes it, I think, easier to make changes and to try new things if we're making it light. And it doesn't have to mean it's unserious or it doesn't have substance. It just means we're not making it significant and heavy, which is, I think, one of the biggest things that gets, or at least certainly for me, gets in the way of me doing things. The more I relate to it as significant, this is really important and everybody's watching and I have to get it right. Like, the harder it becomes to show up and say something or have an opinion or, be seen, be visible.
And it is true. People buy from people, and your personality is immediately what people sort of gravitate to. And I love that you said about people laughing in your coaching sessions. If someone's leaving a coaching session with you and you've made them laugh, the benefit for me there is they're not taking themselves too seriously. And if they're having, by definition of having a coaching session, they've left feeling having a different perspective on whatever it was that was there. So I love that. I think that's brilliant. And it's if that's what you're known for, I'd be absolutely
It's
capitalizing on
embrace it. Exactly. I don't need to deny it or
it.
wish it was something else. I know, embrace it because it works.
Yeah, absolutely embrace it. And that is such a nice facet to your personality to have. So my final question then, what legacy do you hope to leave as a leader?
That is a big question.
It is, isn't it?
I think the way I think about this question is I almost don't get too specific, but it's actually an exercise in the book is thinking about what success means to me. So, and that's success in the biggest, most enduring definition, the sort of, I'm sitting there on my 80th birthday, looking back and going, do I feel proud of my life? And I think part of it is the experience that I want to have, of having joy and fun and connection and adventure and all of that sort of thing. And that might look a lot of different ways through my life. But in terms of the impact I want to have on others, it's really simply about leaving the world a better place for me having been in it. And that might be through the relationships I have, it might be through the work I do, who knows? But if I'm thinking about leaving the world better, that gives me a sort of steer in terms of what I want to be doing, or is an opportunity the thing that's right for me. The book is, for me, I hope a little tiny way I can leave the world better. Because even when I'm not here, those ideas will still be floating around. They're sort of there forever now, which is an exciting and a scary thought in equal measure, I would say.
I
But
think
it's that, that ripple impact. If even just one or two people read that and makes a difference and makes a difference for the people around them and the people they work with and the people they communicate with, it's a good thing for me.
that is an incredible legacy. And on your 80th birthday, you'll be able to say, I wrote a book. No matter what happens, no matter whatever direction this takes you on, I wrote a book, and people will read it, they will be influenced by it, they will enjoy it. And that legacy, I'm interested in your depth. What does success look like for you? Such an interesting question. It's very revealing about a person. And I don't mean, if someone sits and goes, oh, I want to be a billionaire. Well, that's great for that person.
Great.
But it's
Own
very,
it.
it's
Own it. Be
exactly
clear
own
about
it.
it. If that's what matters to you,
That's
go
what matters.
for it.
But it's interesting how few people actually say that. And, success for me personally, I want to be healthy. I want to be here. I want to be a grandmother. I want to be enjoying my grandchildren. And, I just want to be comfortable and happy and have joy. But it's just that, it's those are the things that matter. It's not about, the money. You could be a gazillionaire and not have your health, but to have that impact, have that joy. I just think it's such a nice question. What is your legacy and what does success look like to you? And people always ponder and think, what does that mean? But I think it's a nice question to sort of stop at some point in your life and think, well, actually, what will that legacy be? And the success question is also that. But no one can take that away from you. I wrote a book. You should get a t-shirt with that on. And if you ever end up in one of these like really luxury care homes or whatever, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a big
You'll be
t-shirt with
selling it. I'll be like, I've got my little square thing. You can, I'll take credit cards.
with your greatest achievement on it and a QR code on the back.
Yeah, and it's as you say, it's sort of freeing in a way because even if I do nothing else, I've done that. And I'm not done yet. There's
Yeah,
plenty more to do, but
exactly.
it's sort of both and it's you can celebrate that of saying, well, if nothing else on that scale ever happens again, it's
for
out
that,
there.
for that line in the sand at this stage in your life is
Yeah,
huge.
exactly.
So, the world is your oyster from this point. So that's your challenge to yourself. How can you beat that? Absolutely incredible stuff. So where can we find you online and where can we find your book and more about Sarah Langslow?
Yeah, lots of places. So come find me on LinkedIn, as
I
I'm
will.
practicing being irreverent and
I'm very
provocative.
professional on
Come
LinkedIn,
and
by the
join in the
way.
conversation.
Different
I
on
do try to
Instagram.
strike a balance. So yeah, so Sarah Langslow on LinkedIn. I have a pretty unique surname, so I'm quite easy to find. You can also find me on my website, which is saralangslow.com, or do sweat the small stuff book.com will get you links to a bit more information about the book. And yeah, come and join in the conversation. And yeah, I
Fantastic. I will put all those links in the show notes and
fabulous.
definitely check them out. I can't wait to read it. I'm definitely going to get my copy. And thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been absolutely fantastic. I have loved talking to you. I could talk to you all night. Fascinating conversation as ever, but it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
Thank you for listening today, and special thanks to my amazing guest, Sarah Langslow, for sharing her fascinating story with us. And don't forget to check out her book, Do Sweat the Small Stuff. If you want to increase your sales with your visibility strategy, don't miss out on my free resources. You can find the links in the podcast notes, as well as the links that Sarah also mentioned in the podcast. Join me on the next episode for more incredible stories and insights. You can follow me on Instagram at Coach Amanda Jane or visit my website amandajane.co.uk. Bye for now.